Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. Audiobook by Cinna. Chapter 24. Valek stiffened under my touch. Was he expecting me to strangle him? I wondered. As my hands kneaded his muscles, he relaxed. What would you do? I asked him. If suddenly the world was perfect and you had no one to spy on.
I'd be bored,
Valek said with amusement. Come on. Seriously. A change in profession. I dug my thumbs into the muscle at the base of his neck. A fire dancer? A rush of warmth radiated as brandy pumped through my blood.
No, an arms teacher?
Valek suggested. No. It's a perfect world. No weapons allowed. I moved my hands down his back. How about a scholar? You've read all these books lying around, haven't you? Or are they just to make it difficult for someone to sneak in?
Books serve in so many ways, but I doubt your perfect society would need a scholar or murder.
My hands paused for a second. No, definitely not.
A sculptor? I could carve extravagant statues. We could redecorate the castle and liven things up. How about you?
He asked, as I pressed my fingertips into the small of his back.
What will you do?
Acrobatics. The word flowed without conscious thought. I had thought I left acrobatics behind with my fire amulet, but it seemed my excursion through the trees had reawakened my desire.
An acrobat? Well, that explains a lot.
Aroused by my contact with Valek's sculpted body, I slid my hands around to his stomach. Rayad be damned. The brandy had relaxed me past fear. I started to unfasten Valek's pants. He grabbed my wrists, stopping me.
Yelena, you're drunk.
His voice was hoarse. Valek released my hands and stood. I sat, watching him with surprise as he swooped down to lift me from the couch. Wordless, he carried me to my room and laid me on the bed.
Get some sleep, Yelena.
Valek said softly as he left the room. My world spun as I stared into the darkness. Placing a hand on the cold stone wall next to my bed helped to steady my thoughts. Now I knew. Valek had no interest in me, other than my job as the food taster. I had allowed myself to get caught up in Delana's gossip and Marin's jealousy. The ache of rejection, throbbing in my soul, was my own fault. Why hadn't I learned by now? People turned into monsters, at least the people in my experience. First Brazel, then Rand, although Rayad had stayed consistent. What about Valek? Would he transform into one? Or had he already? Like Star said, I shouldn't be thinking of him at all. Not as a companion, and not to fill the dead place in my heart. As if I could. I laughed. A drunken sound, tattered and ragged, the music of my thoughts. Look around you, Yelena, I chided myself. The poisoned food taster who converses with ghosts. I should be thankful that I breathed, that I existed. I shouldn't long for more than freedom in Cydia. Then I could fill the emptiness. Dismissing all sentimental, weak thoughts, I focused on the business of staying alive. Escaping to Cydia would break no bonds with Valek. Once I obtained the antidote to butterfly's dust, I could set my plans into motion. Determined, I reviewed lock-picking techniques in my mind until I fell into a deep alcohol-induced sleep. I woke an hour before dawn with a pounding head. My mouth felt like an abandoned spiderweb. I imagined dust blowing from my lips with each exhaled breath. Moving with extreme care, I inched out of bed. Wrapping my blanket around my shoulders, I went to get a drink. Valek liked cold water and always kept a pitcher outside on the balcony. The crisp night air blew away the lingering fuzziness of sleep. The castle's stone walls glowed, eerily reflecting the moonlight. I located the metal pitcher. A thin film of ice had formed on the top. Breaking it with a finger, I poured the water into my mouth, gulping. When I tipped my head back for a second drink, I noticed a black spider-shaped object clinging to the castle wall above my head. With growing alarm, I realized The shape was descending toward me. It wasn't a spider, but a person. I searched for a hiding spot, but stopped when I realized that the intruder had probably already seen me. Locking myself in the suite and waking Valek seemed a better plan. But before I could enter the pitch-black living room, I hesitated. Inside, the intruder's dark clothes would be hard to see. A locked door no longer gave me a sense of security since my lockpicking lessons with Janko. Cursing myself for leaving my switchblade inside, I moved to the far end of the balcony, clutching the water pitcher in my hand. The wall climber jumped the remaining distance to the balcony floor. The effortless movement triggered recognition. "Valek?" I whispered. A bright flash of white teeth. Then Valek removed a pair of dark glasses. The rest of his face was hidden behind a hood that covered his head and was tucked into a skin-tight body leotard. "What are you doing?" I asked.
Reconnaissance. Generals tend to stay up late after the commander leaves the brandy meeting, so I had to wait until everyone had gone to bed.
Valek went into the suite. He removed his hood. Lighting the lantern on his desk, he pulled a paper from his pocket.
I hate a mystery. I would have let the identity of the commander's successor remain as secret as I have for 15 years, but tonight's opportunity was too tempting. With 8 drunken generals leaving it off, I could have danced on their beds without waking them. Not one among them has any imagination. I watched all the generals put their envelopes from the commander right into their briefcases.
Valek motioned for me to join him at the desk.
Here, help me decipher this.
He handed me a stiff piece of paper. A jumble of words and numbers were scrawled on it. He had copied the 8 different pieces of the encrypted message by stealing into each general's room. I wondered why he was confiding in me. Too curious to question, I pulled up a chair to help him. "How did you break the wax seal?" I asked.
Rookie trick. All you need is a sharp knife and a tiny flame. Now read me the first set of letters.
He wrote it down, then reordered the letters until he had created the word siege. Opening a book, he flipped through the pages. Symbols, like the ones on my switchblade's handle, peppered the document. The page Valek stopped on was decorated with a large blue symbol that resembled a star in the middle of 3 circles. "What's that?" I asked.
The old battle symbol for siege. The dead king used these markings to communicate with his captains during times of war. They were originally created hundreds of years ago by a great strategist. Read me the next set. They should be numbers.
I told him the numbers. He began to count the lines of text. It occurred to me that I could borrow this book and figure out Janko's message on my switchblade. Eventually, my ass. Won't Janko be surprised? When Valek reached that number, he wrote a letter down on a clean page. After he had finished deciphering the message, Valek sat as still as a held breath. Unable to wait any longer, I asked, "Who is it?"
Guess.
He said. I looked at him. I was tired and hungover.
I'll give you a hint. Who was the happiest about the change? Whose name keeps popping up during the most bizarre situations?
Terror swept over my body like a cloak. If something happened to the commander, Brazel would be in command. I would probably be his first order of business, and wouldn't live long enough to see any changes he might implement in Ixia. Valek understood the look on my face. He nodded.
Right, Brazel.
For 2 days, the commander met with each general in turn. My brief and periodic interruptions to taste the commander's food created uncomfortable moments of silence. The tension around the castle was palpable, as the general's retinues snarled and fought with everyone. On the 3rd day, when I arrived to taste the commander's breakfast, I found him absorbed in conversation with Brazel and advisor Mogkin. The commander's eyes were glazed, his voice a monotone.
"Get out of here!"
Brazel barked. Mogkin pushed me into the throne room.
"Wait here until we summon you,"
he ordered. I hesitated outside the door, uncertain if I should heed this unusual request. If it had come from Valek or the commander, I wouldn't have doubted. But being expected to follow Mogkin's orders rankled. My worries grew as I imagined Brazel attempting an assassination. I was about to search for Valek when he burst into the throne room, his expression hard, as he hurried toward the commander's office.
What are you doing out here?
Valek demanded.
Haven't you tasted his breakfast yet?
I was ordered to wait. He's with Brazel and Moghin. Sudden fear crossed Valek's face. He pushed past me into the office. I followed. Moghin was standing behind the commander, with his fingertips pressing into the commander's temples. When Valek appeared, Moghin stepped away. He said smoothly,
You can definitely feel, sir, that this is an excellent way to ease a headache.
Animation returned to the commander's face.
Thank you, Moghin,
he said. Glaring at Valek's intrusion, he demanded,
What's so important?
Disturbing news, sir.
Valek stared daggers at Brazel and Moghin.
I would like to discuss it in private.
The commander rescheduled their meeting for later that day, then dismissed them.
Yelena, taste the commander's breakfast now.
Yes, sir. Valek watched me taste the food. An intense expression lined his face, making me nervous. Did he think the food was tainted? I rechecked the cooling tea and lukewarm omelet, but detected no foreign substances. I placed the tray on the commander's desk.
Yelena, if I have to eat cold food again, I'll have you whipped. Understand?
The commander's voice lacked passion, but the threat was genuine. Yes, sir, I replied, knowing an excuse was useless.
You're dismissed.
I fled from the office, barely noticing the bustling activity in the throne room. Walking past the entrance, I paused. Hungry, said a flat voice in my head. My stomach growled. I was ravenous. I headed toward the kitchen. When I rounded a corner, Advisor Moghin stood there, blocking my path. He linked his arm through mine and guided me to an isolated section of the castle. Going with him seemed natural. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to be afraid, terrified even. But I couldn't produce the emotions. My hunger had dissipated. I felt content. Moghin steered me down a deserted corridor. A dead end, I thought, still unable to conjure a reaction. His silky gray eyes stared at me for a moment, before he unhooked his arm from mine. His fingers traced the line of black diamonds down my uniform sleeve.
My Yelena!
He said possessively. Fear blazed up my arm and exploded in my chest the second physical contact with Moghin was broken. My emotional ennui had dissolved, but I couldn't move. The muscles in my body wouldn't obey my mind's frantic commands to fight. A magician. Moghin had power. He had used it during the brandy meeting, tipping Valek off. But further contemplation on this revelation was cut short when Moghin stepped closer.
Had I guessed you would cause such trouble, I never would have brought you to Brazel's orphanage.
He smiled at my confusion.
Didn't Rayat tell you that I found you?
No. My voice was husky.
You were lost in the jungle, only 6 years old. Such a beautiful, bright child. Such a delight. I rescued you from the claws of a tree leopard because I knew you had potential. But you were too stubborn, too independent. The harder we tried, the more you resisted.
Moghin cupped his hand under my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze.
Even now, when I'm locked into you, you're still fighting me. I can command your body.
He raised his left arm, and my own left arm mirrored his movement.
But if I tried to control both your mind and body, you would eventually thwart me.
He shook his head in disbelief, as if the whole concept amazed him.
Fortunately, subtle pressure is all that's required.
He pulled his hand away, and then made a pinching gesture with his fingers and thumb. My throat closed. I was unable to breathe. Powerless to defend myself, I sank to the ground. My mind's screaming went unvoiced. Logic grabbed the panic and wrestled it to the ground. Moghin was using magic. Maybe I could block it before I passed out. I tried reciting poisons in my mind.
Such strength.
Moghin said in admiration.
But it won't save you this time.
He bent down and kissed me tenderly, almost fatherly, on the forehead. Peace flowed through me. I stopped resisting. My vision blurred. I felt Moghin take my hand holding it in his own.